panel that had reviewed its procedures and practices. Well, the report has now been handed over to the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and also the chair of the IPCC, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri. Let's hear what they have to say. They're in New York.
The IPCC's transparency, the accuracy and value of its findings, and minimize the potential for errors. The result, I'm happy to say, is the definitive examination of how the IPCC conducts climate science. The IPCC has yet to review the IAC's report, so I'm not able to comment on its findings, but I would like to make a few observations about climate science. The IAC review is the 7th review this year into various aspects of climate science. While the IAC review was limited to the IPCC's processes and procedures, several of the other 6 reviews looked directly at the science of climate change. None of these studies, none, found flaws with the fundamental science of climate change. By overwhelming consensus, the scientific community agrees that climate change is real. Greenhouse gases have increased markedly as a result of human activities and now far exceed pre-industrial values. I think it is worthwhile taking a few minutes to quote from some of these reports. The Muir-Russell review from the United Kingdom had this to say, and I quote, "We did not find any evidence of behavior that might undermine the conclusions of the IPCC assessments." And this from the Dutch Environmental Assessment Agency about the IPCC, I quote, "Overall, the summary conclusions are considered well-founded and none were found to contain any significant errors." The US Environmental Protection Agency concluded that, and I quote again, "Climate science is credible, compelling, and growing stronger." This is not to say that the IPCC cannot improve. It can and will. We have listened to and learned from our critics. Several of them have provided thoughtful recommendations that will inform not only the IPCC but all of climate science and strengthen both. At the IPCC's plenary in October, the governments that form the IPCC will carefully review the recommendations from the IAC. It is important to remember that those governments will decide what actions to take. Whatever those actions are, it is clear that the recommendations from the IAC and other organizations will help guide the processes and procedures of the IPCC's future assessments of climate science. That includes the IPCC's forthcoming assessment report, known as the AR5, which is due in 2013 and 2014. May I emphasize that science thrives on honest, well-reasoned debate, and that there's been a productive debate this year about how to further strengthen the IPCC's work. But we also have to remember that honest scientific discourse wilts under gross distortions and ideologically driven posturing. Sadly, such tactics have been a prominent feature of climate science for many years, and they show no signs of letting up. My hope is that the accumulation of so many investigations into climate science in such a short period of time will strengthen public trust so that we can move forward. Science has confirmed that climate change is real, and the more scientific information we have, the better we can design our actions. Thankfully, experts on climate change remain fully engaged, and the enthusiasm to tackle complex issues is unabated. Their commitment was demonstrated this year during the process for selecting the experts for the IPCC's next assessment report. The number of nominations to work on AR5 increased almost 50% to about 3,000. From those, we selected 831 experts compared with 559 in 2004 for the 4th assessment report. What a tremendous show of support. These experts were selected from fields including meteorology, engineering, biology, physics, oceanography, statistics, and economics, and they represent a broad diversity of geographic locations and viewpoints. And please remember, these scientists, specialists, and experts are not paid. It is impossible for me to adequately express my gratitude to them. Before we move to questions, I would like to introduce the panel here. I'm very pleased to be accompanied today by Dr. Renate Christ, the Secretary of the IPCC. As the General Manager of the IPCC Secretariat, Dr. Christ expertly oversees the technical coordination and administration of the IPCC. We also have Drs. Thomas Stocker, Dr. Chris Field, and Dr. Yuba Sukona. They are among the world's most respected and thoughtful climate researchers. The IPCC is truly fortunate to have them as co-chairs of the working groups. And thank you all for joining us today. We would be pleased to take some of your questions now. Thank you.
Questions, please. Please state your affiliation. Yes.
Chris Schrader, Süddeutsche Zeitung in Munich, Germany. Dr. Pachauri, one of the recommendations of the IAC that we just heard about from Dr. Shapiro was that for each new assessment period there should be a change, complete change in all of the 8 most important jobs, including your own, the IPCC. Since you already chaired the AR4, would you be willing to step down and to make room for somebody else to chair the AR5?
Well, this is an issue which will be discussed in the plenary session in Busan. But the way I look at it, my responsibility is to see that the recommendation of the IAC, and if they are accepted by the IPCC and to the extent that they are accepted by the IPCC, I help to implement the change. I see this as a mission that I cannot shirk and that I cannot walk away from. But of course, I might also emphasize, I think the IAC's recommendations are forward-looking, and I think that was emphasized by Professor Shapiro.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Oikawa for NHK Japanese Public TV. My question is, what's your idea about the how the report of the IAC will affect to the outcome of the upcoming COP16?
Well, as I said in the brief remarks that I made, I think the science of climate change is robust, it is reliable, and I think this is something that has been clearly established by the reviews that have been carried out, and therefore to the extent that science and the acceptance of science drive the outcome in Cancun, I expect that if anything this should help. All that has happened in the past few months should help. But maybe my colleagues would like to say something on the subject. Chris, would you want to?
The world depends on accurate, credible climate science, and the IPCC has consistently provided that over more than 20 years with 4 major assessment reports. We really feel that this review from the IAC and its recommendations will allow the world to have even greater confidence in the credibility of the IPCC reports moving forward.
At this time, I'd like to ask if there are any questions from our press in Geneva.
Let me see. Questions from the press in Geneva. Do you have any questions for any of the members of the panel in New York? Yes, we have one question. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jamil?
Yes, Jamil Shah, de Estado de São Paulo, Brazil. My question is to Dr. Pachauri. When you say that the proposals are forward-looking, does it mean that, for example, if accepted the change in administration, let's say, of the IPCC, you would stay until 2013-14 and then give room to a next person? Is that what you meant?
Well, I've been elected to continue the 5th assessment process, but I'm a servant of the IPCC, and of course I shall abide by any decision that the IPCC takes. That's my responsibility, that's my duty. But at the moment, my mandate is very, very clear. I have to complete the 5th assessment process, and now I feel I have an additional responsibility in seeing that the reform that we ourselves have started, and I'd be happy to talk about that, is carried further on the strength of the IAC's recommendations.